pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. Okay, at this time, please silence electronic devices. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants in this meeting complete a voluntary anonymous survey that is available on the table in the back of the room. It's back here by Mr. Ensweller. So you have a few minutes, please fill it out. What we're going to do now is we're having probably carried on the Decatur County Memorial Hospital annexation. We're opening up the floor for them. Andy.
Andy Sholey. I'm here representing the Decatur County Hospital. 2 months ago, we came in front of the Area Plan Board to start the process of a voluntary annexation. The hospital has 3 parcels that fronts on Montgomery Road. They would like to get those annexed into the city to match the rest of the property the hospital currently owns. They're also asking to have it rezoned, since those 3 parcels are right now in Washington Township. They are zoned agricultural. They would like to have them zoned the rest, it would be B2. That's what the rest of the hospital is zoned at. We did receive a favorable recommendation from the Area Plan Board. So we are here asking for the official annexation and the rezoning of those parcels.
What's on the parcels right now?
There's a house and a shed. I think the house is used for some kind of a clinic. There used to be a house here, but it's been removed, so it's just these.
Any other questions? Any questions from out there in the audience? About neighbors out there? Sorry about the frog, but anyway. It's been a tough weekend. But anyway, if we're not hearing any other questions, or I would take a motion to close the public hearing. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, public hearing meetings. So let's start with our regular meeting. Today is Monday, January 7, 2019. The time is 7:05, and the regular meeting of the Greensburg City Council is called to order. Roll call, please.
Diana McKenzie. Here. Kevin Fleetwood.
Here.
Darren Covington.
Here.
Jamie Cain.
Here.
And Daryl Coleman.
Here.
Okay, great. Now I need approval of the December 3rd, 2018 minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look over the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. Need a second? Okay. Any other questions, guys? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Old business, Bryan Robbins, please.
Hi, this is just for the final reading of ordinance 2018-15, which helps establish Greensburg, the city of Greensburg, as a broadband ready community. I think everybody got a copy of the ordinance previously, and I didn't know if anybody else had questions on that.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding with you. On this agenda, it has, I actually have the ordinance as being 2018-14.
Okay.
If you, I just want to make sure I have is right, it says, it has yours is 2018-15, but then job descriptions, it has 2018-15.
Okay, on here, that, yeah, I'm not sure that would be a Sarah question, probably, because it has
I think this one's
14, okay. So that amended it accordingly, I suppose. So it'd be 2018-14. But essentially what that does is set up the city to become what is designated a Broadband Ready community. It's a program that was established by the state that is simply says this, that anyone who wants to put in that type of infrastructure will appoint a single point of contact for anything related to the project, allow the forms and such to be electronically completed, be able to review or reject project or aspects of the projects in a timely manner that they suggest 10 days here, and ensure that after an application is approved, any inspections, including any additional necessary approvals, will be done also in a timely manner. So it just kind of helps streamline, which in talking to Kathy, Greensburg does anyway, because they consider telecommunications as essential services.
Any questions, guys?
I was gonna make a motion that we pass 2018-14, the broadband ordinance on the second reading.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Brian, thanks. Next, we have the second and final reading of ordinance 2018-16 Standard Personnel Policy Handbook. There was a change since the last time I gave you that there was a change in the tardiness, added some wording to that. Plus, the group offensive one was a verbal warning on there, so I think they didn't have a verbal. So, but that should take care of everything that was.
Those are the right numbers, actually.
So far, it looks like, I think those two were just, and I will go back and double check, but I think so.
Make a motion to pass ordinance 2018-16 Standard Personnel Policy Handbook on second reading.
Second.
Any other questions? Council? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then I have the 2018-17 Fire Personnel Policy Handbook. And the same thing as what with the other one.
I'll make a motion we pass 2018-17 on second reading.
Okay. Second,
Second.
any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And the ordinance 2018-18 Police Personnel Policy Handbook.
Make a motion we pass 2018-18 Police Personnel Policy Handbook on second reading.
Second. Second. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Then, on the second and final reading of ordinance 2018-15, job descriptions. The second
I'll
reading.
make a motion we pass 2018-15 on second reading.
Okay. Second.
Second.
Okay. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so passed. There was a correction on the 2019 holiday schedule. Correction was the President's Day date on there, so. And Jamie, do you have
So, as far as the BZA, unless somebody else has a suggestion, I'd recommend maybe we table this for a month.
okay,
I think Kevin got somebody he's talking to. There is no meeting this month, so it's not like the
Right.
board would go without somebody for a
Right.
month. Unless there's an objection to that, that's fine. I'll make a motion then that we table that until next month.
Okay. Second,
Second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, now we're down to new business, we're back to the hospital. Andy? This will be the first reading of the ordinance 2019-2. Annexation.
Andy Sholey representing the Decatur County Hospital. Guess I'm here for the first reading of what I just told you
Right.
10 minutes ago.
Yeah, that works.
Move to approve on first.
I'll second.
Okay, any other questions, guys? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thanks, Andy. Okay, now we're with John Julian in Umbaugh Airport.
Thank you, Mayor. John Julian, partner with Umbaugh. Here to give you an overview of the funding plan for the airport project. The project's been discussed at length over the last several years. It's been a process getting it to this point, but you are getting close to needing to have the local funding plan in place. So what I'd like to do this evening is give you an overview of the project and the funding plan. Council isn't scheduled to take any action on that plan, but if the project is to move forward, the plan is to come to the council meetings next month with an ordinance, and I'll get to that in a minute. Not to take up too much of your time in terms of background details, but just to recap, the project involves the acquiring of land and then the construction of a one-way runway extension. So I'm thinking of this in two phases. The intent is to fund those two phases with one financing package. And although this will be done in accordance with state statutes that are applicable to the airport authority, it's probably easiest to think about the financing package as if it's a line of credit. Because although it's technically going to be defined as a bond issue by state statute, it'll have the feel of a line of credit, and where the airport authority will draw down funds as needed to take care of costs as they're incurred, instead of borrowing monies all in a lump sum up front. The reason that's important, as you probably know, this project is eligible for, and it's anticipated, the lion's share of the financing will come through federal and state grants. And by lion's share, we're probably looking at in the 95% range. Those of you who have heard me address this council in the past have heard me talk about a lot of capital projects. Very few, actually no projects that I've been here to talk to you about have been projects that really qualify for this amount of grant. These programs for the airports are pretty unique in terms of being able to get up to 95% grant funding. So it's one of those last few areas where local costs can be controlled. When we look at the numbers that the engineers have put together, we believe, based upon the cash flows for that project in terms of what project costs are, when grant dollars are going to come in, you'll be able to complete the project using about $500,000 of edit funds that are already in the edit plan, and the net operating revenues of the airport to fully retire this project in the 5, 6, 7 year time frame. So again, that's pretty unique for a project of this size. I didn't mention the total dollar amounts, but we're talking about a project that's in that $10 to $11 million range between the acquisition of land and the construction of the airport. There is a statute that lays out how the financing would be completed. It would have a security pledge limited to the revenues of the airport. So the city is not putting any of its constitutional debt available pledged towards this project. And so from that perspective, it's simply the airport's obligation. The banks that we've been in conversation with about this financing understand the nature of the project and the fact that the security of the debt is heavily dependent on the receipt of those grant dollars. And so it's important that they understand that. It's important that the council understands that that's the lion's share where the funding is going to come from. And as I mentioned, if everything comes together as planned, the $500,000 commitment of Edward funds will take care of things. The accountant in me says we always have to look at all the potential outcomes of this. The project will be phased, as I said, as a line of credit. And so until the grants are better defined in terms of how much they are going to be and when they're going to come in, you'll be able to control the amount of cost that you have. By that I mean you're going to take care of land acquisition, and it's that amount of the cost that you'll be at risk for before the full grants are sized and the timing of that is laid out. So picking up where I was a minute ago, looking at making sure we've got everything identified in terms of what the risk is. The risk would be that if you acquire the land and for whatever reason the grants didn't materialize. The security for that is the net operating revenues of the airport. Well, the airport's doing fine, but it isn't going to have enough net income to retire that debt simply from the hangar rentals and fuel sales, etc. So there will be a mortgage interest that the banks will have in the land that's being acquired. So your first level or the second level of security is that mortgage interest. So, or said more simply, if the grants don't materialize and you can't move forward with the full project, your security would be you're going to sell the land and retire that debt, or you could, if you wanted to keep the land or felt it was important to keep the land, you would have to come up with some other city funds to help retire that debt. The nice thing is, you don't have to make those determinations until the question's answered about if and when the grants materialize. The point I wanted to emphasize is you've got a plan A. Plan A is the grants come in and the amounts that are expected and the time frame expected. Plan B is the mortgage interest in the land that would be used to liquidate the loan. Procedurally, I'm going to conclude this, just kind of walk through the steps if you want to move forward with this. It can be done on a fairly streamlined basis. There is an ordinance that will be adopted by council, and that ordinance could be ready for you to take it under consideration at your February meeting. There are no public hearings associated with that. It's simply the adoption of that ordinance. Once the ordinance is in place, we would ask the banks that we've been talking to submit formal proposals for the lending terms, and those could be evaluated after the ordinance is adopted, and you would select the bank that offers the best financial package for you. If you were to adopt the ordinance at the next meeting, which would require you obviously to suspend rules if you're inclined to do that, you could close the loan in early February. If not, you would close that after your March meeting if the ordinance was passed in March. So it could be, and it's intended expected that you'll move this along fairly quickly if that's, you know, if you're ready to move forward with the project. Those are the details behind the project and the funding plan. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer those this evening. Thank you very much.
Well, just thinking, so on the grants, do we know yet how that will be reimbursed to us as we move forward?
As I understand it, and Paul Schaefer, your engineer, is probably better. In fact, I don't want to confuse him. Maybe you can, instead of me giving him my answer and then you correcting it, maybe just hear it directly from the horse's mouth.
Hi, good evening. My name is Paul Schaefer. I'm with Butler, Fairman, and Seifert. And the grants are called what's called an Airport Improvement Program grant, or AIP. It's funded out of the Aviation Trust Fund from the federal government. So we apply for those grants, and then the FAA reviews those. We first submit a capital improvement plan, then we submit the applications each year. Each year the applications are reviewed and granted based on the available funds. So it's not a new thing here. We are recipients of federal grants multiple times in scenarios just like this one.
So a couple follows there. So have we actually applied for the grant and been awarded the grant?
Yes, so we've received 14 grants so far in the history of the AIP program with the airport.
That's Greensburg is.
Greensburg, yeah. And so currently the airport, I guess it just depends on when you decide, when you call the start of the project, but specifically the last two grants were issued for this project. The first grant was for preliminary engineering and some environmental to wrap up the environmental study, which was approved back in July of 2018 by the Federal Aviation Administration. The second grant is basically to complete the design, the surveying, and the appraisal work that's going along with the next phase.
So for each phase, you had to apply again. Is that how that works?
Yes, we've got the project broken into multiple years. It's rare that they would write a grant for one lump sum amount all at the same time. An example would be when the city acquired the original airport property. It's a similar situation. There was a loan taken to pay for that property. It was reimbursed over a series of 7 grants over 7 years, which basically aligned with the payment plan, so that the community never ended up needing any additional funds at that time. So we've done this before.
So the total project is estimated at 10 to 11 million. So does the city have to front that money and then seek reimbursement on the back end?
To a certain degree, what John had mentioned, there's a cash flow plan that we have worked together to develop. I think John alluded to, you need to front end the land cost, and then once that starts getting reimbursed, it funds the rest of the construction. So the answer is no, you don't need $11 million up front, but you do need a balance in the bank to allow the project to start, and I can let John speak to the specifics on the cash flow.
What would be that balance that we'd have to have up front? Is that the 500,000?
No, looking at because you got the upfront of the land acquisition and the time lag, looking at the cash flows, I would anticipate your maximum drawing into the line of credit to be in that $2.5 to $3 million range. The ordinance that would set up the borrowing probably would be in that 3.5, just to give you some some wiggle room. The reason we would go, that much stronger than the cash flow is a line of credit. You're not paying any interest on it. It's just there as a safety net if timing were to require you to need that.
So the city would issue, just trying to think how this works, the city would issue the bond, and then the airport authority would draw from that as their line of credit, and then they would pay back what they borrowed against. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Because the airport, the aviation board is really just a department of the city. I know it acts in a fair amount of independence, but this council would adopt the authorizing ordinance. The ordinance would speak to a maximum amount to borrow, let's say 3.5 million. So that's what the bank would be committing to lend if needed. You're only going to borrow as funds are needed to keep the project moving forward. To the extent that you get grant dollars to reimburse, that line of credit is going to move down. And you draw it from the bank, and then you pay it back in that format.
So we're not taking out we wouldn't take out a $3.5 million bond, but we would set up with the bank.
And maximum borrowing about authorization. Yeah.
And then as the airport authority needs funds, the council would, or somehow or another, we would draw down on that issue of bond.
Exactly. There'll be a mechanics set up with the bank to, so that the money's being drawn for the specific project, so those dollars will be drawn to be spent. Then as grant monies are received, that'll be paid back to the bank to keep the maximum amount of borrowing as low as possible.
And I'm sure you don't know this at this point, but is there any rough guess on, because you broke it down into 2 phases, on what the first phase would cost?
Well, our estimate of land acquisition and some of the front end costs, I think there's around 1.8 million. So you could probably anticipate, in that range.
The one final question. The $500,000 from edit, so if we had the line of credit, is that for the 5%?
Ultimately, that's going to fit into that plus the cash flows of the airport over the time frame.
What's the first hurdle that you have to meet for the first grant?
So we've already received 2 grants with specific to design. The next grant would be one for the grade and drain phase and would reimburse some land expenses if we're in a position to do so. So right now in the process, we have done a boundary survey of the proposed area. And that survey is now being processed by right-of-way engineers writing the legal descriptions before we can go and start our appraisal work. So the next step in that process is to get appraisals in line and make offers to the landowners as those appraisals become available. So that's the next step. So we cannot obviously construct the grade and drain phase of the project until you physically own the land, and there are 4 physical parcels that we'll need to have in place before we go forward on that.
What's how long does it usually take to get the money once you submit the grant?
It really, we've been working with the FAA quite a while to pave the road on that. While there's no guarantee at all at this point, because Congress has to make an appropriation each year that's a little beyond even the FAA's control. But right now, 2020 is the first year they have. The airport approved a capital improvement plan last month on December 17th at their normal meeting, asking for the money in 19.